I realized my parents were trying to take my baby from me when I saw my own name listed as unfit mother on a guardianship petition they'd already filled out. Right there in black and white on my dad's dining room table, between the bowl of grocery store potato salad and the basket of dinner rolls. If you've never had the experience of reading a legal document where your own parents are calmly explaining to a judge why your child would be safer and better off without you, it feels a little like stepping outside your body and watching someone else's life explode. I was holding my daughter on my hip with one arm and a lukewarm cup of coffee in the other when my mother slid the papers toward me like they were a brochure for a vacation Bible camp. "We just want you to read it with an open mind," she said. My dad sat at the head of the table, arms folded, jaw set, like he was about to negotiate a business deal, not dismantle my family. My younger sister, Erin, stared down at her hands, the same way she did when we were kids and our parents decided something for our own good. "What is this?" I asked. My voice sounded weirdly calm to my own ears. The top page said, "Petition for temporary guardianship of minor child," in big official font. Under minor child, my daughter's name, Ruby, 6 months old. Under proposed guardians, my parents. Under current custodian, me. Under reason for petition, a paragraph that started with "Mother suffers from untreated mental illness including but not limited to postpartum depression, anxiety, and possible psychotic episodes," and only got worse from there. "You know how you've been struggling," my mother said, soft voice, church counselor voice, the one she uses when she's about to say something awful and call it love. "The crying, the panic attacks, the way you say you feel overwhelmed, the incident with the bathtub." I asked David to take over bath time because I was afraid I'd drop her. I snapped. I didn't have an episode. I had a normal, intrusive thought that my therapist says literally every new mother has at some point. "And I told you that in confidence. And we're so proud you went to therapy," she said quickly, like this was a team effort. "But you missed your last 2 appointments. You haven't gone back on the medication. You told me you were tired of feeling numb." "I switched providers because the first one kept canceling on me," I said. "I told you that too." My dad cleared his throat. "He doesn't do feelings. He does facts. At least that's what he calls them when he bulldozes people." "Maddie," he said, using my childhood nickname like that would soften what he was about to say. "We've watched you for 6 months now. We know you love Ruby. Nobody is questioning that. But love isn't enough. You're not coping. The house is a mess, you cry all the time, you forget to eat. You told your mother you sometimes wish you could just drive away and not come back." "I said that once," I said, heat rising in my face. "After 3 nights of no sleep. I said it and then I cried for an hour because I felt so guilty for even thinking it. It was a feeling, not a plan." Erin finally looked up. Her eyes were shiny. "They think you're going to hurt Ruby," she said quietly. The words hit me like a slap. "What?" I whispered. "They think you're going to hurt yourself or Ruby," she said, her voice trembling. "They've been talking to a lawyer." "We had to at least get information," my mother rushed to add. "We're not doing anything yet, honey. This is just a safety net. In case things get worse. It says here you're asking the court to give you full temporary guardianship," I said, tapping the paper with a hand that shook. "It says I will retain visitation at the discretion of the guardians, which means you get to decide if I even see my own daughter. That's not a safety net. That's a trap." "Language," my father snapped, as if I'd sworn instead of called his plan what it was. "We haven't filed anything yet, but we have a responsibility. As grandparents, as parents, as Christians. If we see a child in danger, we can't just sit on our hands." "She's not in danger," I said. My voice was rising now. Ruby squirmed against my hip, sensing something was off. I bounced her automatically, muscle memory, even as my heart raced. "She's loved. She's fed. She's healthy. Our pediatrician says she's thriving." "And whose insurance is she on?" My dad shot back. "Whose roof is over her head?" Who paid for that crib you insist on keeping in your tiny apartment instead of moving back home where you'd have help? That's when I understood. This wasn't about safety. It was about control. It always had been. To explain why I missed the red flags leading up to this, why it took an actual court form on the table for me to see what my parents were doing, you have to understand the way I grew up. My parents had me late in life. My mom was 38, my dad 42. In a small town where most people start their families right out of high school. By the time my friends' parents were figuring out how to use Facebook, mine were leading marriage retreats and parenting classes at our church, full of advice about godly households and order in the home. On paper, we were one of those families people envied. My dad owned a small HVAC business and liked to say, "We don't live fancy, but we live free," meaning we never missed a bill. My mom stayed home and ran the women's Bible study, baked casseroles for anyone within a 10-mile radius who stubbed their toe, and sent us to private Christian schools. The flip side of all that stability was control. My parents believed in training up a child in the way they should go, which in practice meant no sleepovers without a full background check of the other family, no dating until 18, no social media until their friends' kids had already posted party photos, and absolutely no questioning their authority. "We're not raising you to be our friend," my dad would say. "We're raising you to be a decent human being. You'll thank us later." I learned early that the easiest way to survive was to be the compliant child. My older sister, Jess, tried the other route. She was their test run. Bright, loud, rebellious. She wanted to dye her hair blue at 14. They said no. She did it anyway in a friend's bathroom and came home with streaks of the color still on her ears. They grounded her for a month. When she fell in love at 16 with a boy from public school, they forbade her from seeing him. She snuck out. They caught her. There were screaming matches behind closed doors, muffled crying through the walls. The summer she turned 17, she got pregnant. I was 9. I remember the night my parents found out. The house went very quiet, the way it did before a storm. My mother didn't speak to Jess for 3 days. My father did all his talking behind the garage with the boy, where I couldn't hear what was being said. But I remember the boy's face when he left, pale, set, older. "Your sister made choices," my mother said to me, tight-lipped, months later, when Jess's belly had started to show and then mysteriously hadn't anymore. "She's going to live with family out of state for a while to get herself together. We're not going to discuss it. It's adult business." Jess left for Aunt Linda's and didn't come back. Not after 6 months. Not after a year. We got occasional postcards that said things like, "Love you, kiddo, be good," with pretty pictures of places that were definitely not Aunt Linda's boring suburb. My parents called her lost and backslidden and hard-hearted. My mother cried in church when people asked about her. "We're trusting God to bring her home," she'd say. Meanwhile, they doubled down on me. I was told explicitly and often, "You see what your sister did with her freedom. That's why we have rules." I followed them. I got straight A's. I joined youth group. I didn't drink in high school, didn't skip class, didn't so much as kiss a boy until college. And even then it was a closed-mouth, eyes-closed situation with a boy my father had already vetted. Erin was born when I was 12. She was technically my sister, but by then I'd already been drafted into a third-parent role. I rocked her when she cried, changed diapers, made her grilled cheese after school while Mom was at Bible study. My parents liked to joke that I was born maternal. I liked the feeling of being trusted, of being needed. I also liked that when Erin hit her own teenage years and tried to push back, our parents' anger tended to slide right past me and land on her. I was the good one, the responsible one, the one they bragged about. "Madison's going places," my dad would say at church picnics. "She's not going to make the same mistakes as her sister." I believed him. I went to college 2 hours away, far enough to breathe, close enough they could swing by unannounced. I started dating David there. He grew up in a normal family, the kind where people argued about whose turn it was to do the dishes and then moved on. When he met my parents, he was charmed. "They're so involved," he said. "My folks barely know what I'm doing half the time." I didn't know how to explain the difference between involvement and surveillance without sounding ungrateful. We got married at 25, in the same church I'd been dedicated in as a baby. My parents paid for half the wedding and treated it like a joint project. There were long fights about the music. Secular love songs invite the wrong spirit. The dress? Modest, not matronly. The guest list? We're not inviting your sister if she's still living in sin. Jess didn't come. I cried about it quietly in the bathroom at the reception while my mother patted my back and said, "Maybe this will be the thing that softens her heart." 2 years into our marriage, we started trying for a baby. It didn't happen. Month after month, negative tests. Year after year. We did the tests, the hormones, the awkward appointments. Unexplained infertility is a diagnosis that feels like being handed a shrug. My mother said it was God's timing. My father said maybe this was a sign that we should focus on our careers. I smiled tightly and kept injecting myself with medication and peeing on sticks in secret. When I finally got pregnant at 32, it felt like a miracle. Our parents cried when we told them. My mother immediately started knitting. My father went out and bought a crib before they stopped making the good ones. It didn't take long for the old patterns to reassert themselves. We were pregnant, but my mother treated my body like a community project. "You shouldn't be eating that," she'd say, taking a turkey sandwich out of my hand because she'd read a blog about listeria. "I don't want you lifting that laundry basket. You'll strain something." She insisted on coming to every appointment. When I gently suggested that maybe David should come to some of them alone with me, she pouted. "I was there for all of Aaron's milestones," she said. "I just want to be included." "You weren't there for Jess," I said before I could stop myself. Her face shuddered. "We're not talking about Jess," she said. "Jess made her choices." At 34 weeks, I was diagnosed with mild preeclampsia. Nothing dramatic, but enough to put me on modified bed rest. My parents took this as a sign from heaven that I should move back into their house until the baby comes. "We have more space," my dad said. "You can stay in your old room. Your mother can keep an eye on you while David's at work." "We live 20 minutes away," I said. "He can be here in 10 if anything happens. I'd rather be in my own bed." They looked at me like I just said I wanted to give birth in a ditch. "You're being stubborn," my mother said. "You always do this, Maddie. You act like accepting help is some kind of sin." "Sometimes it feels like accepting help means giving you veto power over my whole life," I snapped. She cried. I caved. I moved into my old bedroom, swollen ankles and all, while David shuttled back and forth after work. It was like being 17 again, except now everyone acted like my uterus was a public utility. When my water broke at 38 weeks, my mother rode in the car to the hospital, praying loudly the entire time, while David drove white-knuckled and I tried not to scream at both of them. Labor was long, messy, terrifying. Ruby finally arrived at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday, purple and squalling and perfect. The first time they put her on my chest, something in me cracked open. People talk about the rush of love. For me, it was a rush of fear. The love was there, huge and immediate, but tangled up with it was this overwhelming sense of responsibility. This is mine. I have to keep her safe. And underneath that, quieter but insistent. Don't screw this up. Don't be like Jess. The first weeks were a blur. Sleepless nights, cracked nipples, hormone crashes. Cried a lot. Sometimes for a reason the baby wouldn't latch, my stitches hurt, David had to go back to work. Sometimes for no reason at all except that the sky was blue and that felt like too much. My mother hovered. She'd sweep into the room, take Ruby from my arms with practiced hands and say, "Go shower. You look exhausted. You're no good to her like this." She was right. I was exhausted. I also felt like a guest star on my own show. She criticized everything, always couched in concern. "Don't hold her like that. Her neck isn't strong yet. Don't let her sleep on you. You're creating bad habits. You're feeding her again? She'll get colic." If I pushed back even a little, she'd sigh. "I've raised 2 daughters," she'd say. "I think I know a thing or two." Sometimes, when Ruby was screaming at 3 a.m. and my mother had gone home and David was snoring, I'd stand in the kitchen, staring at the knives in the block, and think if I just cut my hair and got in the car and drove till I ran out of gas, would anyone miss me? The thought scared me. I told my doctor. She handed me a questionnaire. Postpartum depression, maybe some anxiety, she said, scribbling on her pad. Very common. Medication and therapy help. I started Zoloft. I found a therapist. I started saying things out loud in that small office that I'd never said to anyone. Sometimes I feel like Ruby would be better off with my mother, I admitted once, tears running down my face. She's so confident. I feel like I'm play acting at being a grown-up. Where do you think you learned to doubt yourself like that? My therapist asked gently. My mother, I said, then immediately felt guilty. She means well. She just takes over. Control masquerading as concern is still control, she said. At home, my parents kept a running commentary on my mental health. You look tired, my mother would say every single time she saw me, as if she'd get a prize when I finally admitted defeat. Have you taken your meds? My father would joke about my crazy pills at dinner. Don't forget your happy juice, he'd say. We don't need you going off the deep end. I tried to set boundaries. Stop calling them that, I said. It's not funny. You know we're just teasing, he said. You've lost your sense of humor since you had that baby. If I snapped, it became evidence. You're so angry all the time, my mother would whisper. I'm worried about you. Somewhere in the midst of all that, my therapist changed clinics. My appointments got rescheduled, then canceled. I ran out of meds and told myself I'd be fine for a week or two until the new prescription went through. A week or two turned into a month. The fog crept back in. David tried, but he works long hours. He'd come home exhausted and I'd thrust the baby at him and say, Your turn, before going upstairs to sob in the shower. I'm worried, he said one night, sitting on the edge of the bed while I stared blankly at the wall. You're not yourself. Maybe this is myself, I snapped. Maybe I've always been one chemical away from losing it. He reached for my hand. That's not fair, he said. To you. Or to us. Call your therapist. Please. I did. They put me on a wait list. 2 days later, my mother showed up unannounced, as usual, and found me sitting on the kitchen floor, crying while Ruby screamed in her swing. What's wrong? She demanded, scooping the baby up with one arm and pulling me to my feet with the other. She wouldn't stop crying, I sobbed. I fed her and changed her and rocked her and she just won't stop. Babies cry, my mother said. That's their job. But later that night, I overheard her on the phone in the hallway whispering. She was on the floor, Tom, just sitting there. The baby was wailing. I think she was having some kind of breakdown. I told myself she was just venting. That's what we do when we're worried, right? We talk to people. It didn't occur to me that she was documenting. 2 weeks before the intervention, there was the bathtub incident. It wasn't as dramatic as my parents later made it sound. I was giving Ruby a bath in one of those little plastic baby tubs that fits in the big tub. She wriggled, kicked, splashed, laughed. For one awful split second, my brain flashed an image. What if I just pushed her face down? It was intrusive and horrifying and exactly the kind of thought my therapist had warned me about. Your brain is misfiring safety checks, she'd said. It's going to show you the scariest possible thing so you can avoid it. Thoughts are not actions. I froze. Then I grabbed a towel, plucked Ruby out of the tub and called for David. Can you finish? I asked, my voice shaking. I'm afraid I'll drop her. Or slip. Or something. Of course, he said. I stepped out, sat on the edge of the bed and shook for a while. Later, trying to be honest, trying to do the shame can't live in the light thing they tell you in therapy, I told my mother about the thought. Her eyes widened, then softened. I'm so glad you told me, she whispered, squeezing my hand. I'm not judging. I'm here to help. What she did not tell me was that she wrote it down, word for word, in a notebook she kept in her nightstand. She didn't tell me she called a family lawyer. just to ask what our options would be if Maddie got worse. She didn't tell me she and my father had already started drafting that guardianship petition. Which brings us back to the dining room table, the stack of papers, my daughter on my hip. Maddie, we're not trying to take her from you, my mother said now, eyes wide and wet. We want to be in a position to intervene quickly if something happens. If you have an episode. You keep saying episode like I'm going to wake up one day and dropkick my baby out the window, I said. Do you hear how you sound? Postpartum psychosis is real, my father said. We've done the research. Women drown their babies in bathtubs, drive off bridges. You think their families saw it coming. So your plan is to preemptively take my child? I asked. Just in case I might be one of those women? Our plan, he said slowly, as if explaining algebra to a toddler, is to have legal authority to step in if needed, so we don't have to fight some bureaucrat while things spiral. It's common sense. You could just show up, I said. Like you already do. You could help without a court order. My mother's lips trembled. You don't always let me help, she said. You tell me to back off. You say I'm overstepping. You push me away. What if there comes a day when you push us away completely? Then what? Then that's my right as an adult, I said. As Ruby's mother. The word mother hung there, contested territory. We're not the enemy, my dad said. We're trying to do the right thing. Someone has to be the grown-up. I'm 34 years old, I snapped. I have a mortgage and a career and a baby. I am the grown-up. My mother reached across the table, put her hand over mine. Please don't make this harder than it has to be, she whispered. If you'll just sign, we can all relax. Nothing will change day to day. She'll still live with you. We'll just have assurance. The word sign lit up in my head like a warning siren. I'm not signing anything, I said, pulling my hand back. Not without a lawyer. Not ever, actually. My dad's face darkened. We hoped you'd be reasonable, he said. But we're prepared to do what we have to do. What does that mean? I asked, but I already knew. It means, he said, that if you won't agree to this voluntarily, we may have to file anyway. For Ruby's sake. Erin flinched. Dad, she said. Please. He ignored her. I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor. We're leaving, I said. Come on, Ruby. Don't you walk out of here, my father barked. Don't you dare walk out of here and make us the bad guys. You did that yourselves, I said. My legs were shaking, but I walked out anyway. Ruby started to fuss in the car seat as I buckled her in, sensing my adrenaline. My mother followed us onto the porch. Maddie, honey, please just think about it, she called after me. We're not trying to hurt you. I turned. You already did, I said. That night I barely slept. Every noise made me jump. I kept imagining a knock at the door, CPS workers behind my parents, a social worker with a clipboard saying, "We received some concerning reports." They haven't filed anything yet, David said, reading the same printouts for the 10th time. They can't just swoop in and take her. That's not how this works. You're not unsafe, Maddie. You're struggling, but you're getting help. Courts don't rip babies from mothers for crying in the kitchen. They might if the grandparents have a 10-page dossier on all the times I cried, I muttered. We don't know what they've collected. Then find out, he said. You know them. They've probably written it down somewhere. He was right. My parents don't do chaos. They do paperwork. Lists. Calendars. Files. I grew up in a house where there was a labeled folder for everything from mortgage to Maddie's dental records. If they were willing to show me a petition, there was more where that came from. The next day, under the pretense of picking up the diaper bag I'd forgotten there, I went back to my parents' house alone while David stayed with Ruby. She's asleep, I lied. I don't want to wake her. My mother fretted. You shouldn't be driving when you're this upset, she said. We can bring it to you. I'm fine, I said. My heart was pounding, but I smiled. Also, I think I left my notebook here. The one from therapy. That part wasn't a lie. It had vanished along with some of my mail in the last month. I chalked it up to my scattered postpartum brain. Now I wasn't so sure. While my mother went to hunt for the diaper bag, I slipped down the hallway to their bedroom. The door was half open. In my house growing up, privacy was optional, but respecting other people's space was mandatory, unless you were my parents. They went through my stuff whenever they felt like it. Nothing to hide, nothing to fear, my dad would say. It felt almost poetic to flip that on them. The nightstand drawer on my mother's side held exactly what I expected. Tissues, half-finished crossword puzzles, a Bible, a notebook. I opened it. The first page had a date. Ruby's birth, January 14th. Underneath, in my mother's looping handwriting, Maddie very emotional. Cried during epidural. Cried when baby latched. Needs monitoring. My stomach dropped. I flipped through. Every page was more of the same. February 3rd. Found Maddie sitting in dark with baby. Said she feels like a bad mom. Worrisome. February 10th. Maddie didn't want to wake David when baby cried. Said, he needs his sleep. Exhausted. Might resent baby. March 2nd. Maddie told me she thought about driving away. Classic postpartum ideation. The bathtub incident had its own entry. April 7th. Maddie reported intrusive thought about drowning baby. Immediately handed baby to David. Claims she would never do it. Still concerning. My chest tightened. It wasn't just that she'd written it down. It was the tone, clinical, detached, like she was observing a lab rat. There were even little stars in the margin next to some entries. I flipped to the back. There was a list titled Examples for Court, if needed. The bullet points were all my worst moments ripped from context. Me crying on the floor. Me forgetting a pediatrician appointment and rescheduling it for the next day. Me snapping at my father when he barged into our bedroom without knocking while I was breastfeeding. Each one had a date. I felt sick. In my parents' home office, really a repurposed guest room with a desk and a file cabinet, I found the rest. A folder labeled Maddie held copies of emails my mother had printed. Messages I'd sent from the fog of 3 a.m., telling her I was tired, scared, overwhelmed. She'd highlighted the scariest sentences. A folder labeled Ruby held printouts of articles about postpartum psychosis and cases where mothers had harmed their children. Some had notes in the margin. Judge will take this seriously or show to CPS? And then there was another folder, one with my sister's name on it. Jess. My heart hammered. I opened it. Inside were photocopies of old court documents. Petition for guardianship of minor child. Jessica Callahan versus Catherine and Thomas Bennett. The dates were 20 years old. The child's name Ava. Birth date. The same year Jess left for Aunt Linda's. The petition was from Jess, not our parents. She'd been trying to get her daughter back. Our parents' response, neatly copied, argued that Jess was unstable, immoral, unfit. They cited her lifestyle choices, her substance use, her history of deceit. Attached were letters from pastors, neighbors, friends of my parents, all attesting to their character and Jess's rebellion. There was a final order from a judge, custody to my parents, supervised visitation to Jess at the discretion of the guardians. I flipped through, hands shaking. At the bottom of the stack was a photo. A little girl, maybe 3, with my sister's eyes, sitting on my parents' couch, holding an Easter basket. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, our granddaughter Ava, Easter 2005. I remembered a little blonde girl in our house when I was in college. I'd come home one weekend and found her in the living room playing with blocks. This is Madison, my mother had said. She's your cousin's daughter. We're watching her for a few days. I'd ruffled the girl's hair, said hello, gone back to my life. It had never occurred to me to question it. What are you doing in here? My father's voice made me jump. I spun around, the folder still in my hands. He stood in the doorway, eyes narrowed. I was looking for my notebook, I said, which was technically true. Found a lot more than that. I held up the Jess folder. You tried to take Ava from her, I said. You succeeded. He shrugged, something like annoyance flickering across his face. We didn't try, he said. We did what needed to be done. Jess was on drugs. She was living with some loser in a studio apartment with no job. She couldn't take care of that child. So you lied to me, I said. You said she went to live with Aunt Linda to get herself together. You let me think she abandoned us. Abandoned her baby. What would you have preferred? He asked. That we told 9-year-old Maddie that her sister got knocked up and was unfit to parent? That would have helped. It would have been the truth, I said. Instead, you turned her into a cautionary tale. You used her as an example every time you wanted to scare me into obeying. It worked, he said. You turned out well. Did I? I asked. Because from where I'm standing, I turned into the perfect target for you to do the exact same thing to. You're not Jess, he said. You're not on drugs. You're not. But you're still building a case, I said, my voice shaking. Just like you did with her. You're writing everything down, twisting it, printing my emails, highlighting my worst moments. You're planning to take my child. We are planning to protect your child, he snapped. If Jess had listened to us, Ava wouldn't have seen half the things she did before we finally stepped in. We're not making that mistake again. My mother appeared behind him, face pale. Tom, she whispered. Please. No, I said. Let him talk. Let him tell me how he justified alienating my sister from her own child in the name of protection. Jess chose her path, he said. She chose drugs, men, chaos. We chose stability for Ava. That's what grandparents do when their children can't or won't do their duty. And what if your children never had a chance? I asked. What if you made sure they failed just enough so you could swoop in and be the saviors? He glared at me. That's enough, he said. Give me those. He held out his hand for the folders. For once in my life, I didn't obey. No, I said. These are copies. Which means the originals are at the courthouse. Which means judges saw this and believed you. My voice shook, but I didn't back down. You're not going to do it to me. Try and stop us, he said, and there it was, the line between concerned grandparent and adversary drawn sharp and clear. I left. I called David from the car and sobbed so hard he could barely understand me. They did it to Jess, I kept saying. They'll do it to us. Then we need to get ahead of them, he said. Find a lawyer. Tell your therapist. Document our own side. The next few weeks were a blur of appointments. A lawyer who specialized in family law and grandparent rights, because apparently that's a whole subgenre now. Listen to me, eyes widening. They already have a draft petition, she asked. And a notebook documenting your episodes? Yes, I said. And a history of getting custody of a grandchild. We need to assume they'll file, she said. But the burden is on them to prove you're unfit. Do you have any CPS history? Any arrests? Substance abuse? No, I said, heat rushing to my face. I've never even had a speeding ticket. Then they're going to lean hard on the mental health angle, she said. Postpartum depression, anxiety, any intrusive thoughts you've reported. We need your therapist's notes. We need your OB's notes. We need everyone who has seen you with your baby to write letters. It felt surreal, gathering character references for my own motherhood. My pediatrician wrote a letter saying Ruby was well cared for, hitting all her milestones, bonded to me. My therapist wrote a letter explaining the difference between postpartum depression and psychosis, how intrusive thoughts are not the same as intent, how I'd always sought help appropriately. My friends wrote letters about how I was the one who always had extra snacks at playdates, how I'd babysat their kids for years. Even Erin wrote one, shaky but fierce. In it, she talked about watching me take care of her for half her childhood. Maddie has basically been a mom since she was 12, she wrote. If anything, she's too hard on herself. Meanwhile, my parents escalated. They started showing up unannounced more often. If I didn't answer the door, my mother would text, We're worried, please respond, followed by, if we don't hear from you, we may have to call someone. Someone meaning welfare checks, CPS. Whoever would come knock and peer into my messy living room and judge my sink full of dishes. My lawyer advised me to document everything. I started keeping my own notebook. Dates, times, what they said, how often they asked me to just sign. Don't engage emotionally, she said. Treat them like hostile coworkers. Short, factual responses. No long texts you'll regret later. They will use anything they can against you. It felt monstrous putting that wall up between us. These were my parents. The people who rocked me when I was sick, who taught me to ride a bike, who came to every school choir concert. And now I was treating them like opposing counsel. Part of me wanted to cave, to sign whatever they wanted just to make the tension go away. That part of me sounded suspiciously like the little girl who learned early that the quickest way to restore peace was to do what they said. Then I'd look at Ruby, at the way her fists curled around my shirt, at the way her eyes followed me when I moved across the room, and the mama bear part of me would roar. Nobody was taking her from me. Not without a fight. The petition was filed 3 weeks later. My parents didn't even tell me. I found out because a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door and handed me a thick envelope. Inside, the same guardianship petition I'd seen on the dining room table, plus my mother's notebook entries, plus affidavits from their pastor and 2 of their friends, all attesting to my increasing instability, my refusal to accept help, my hostility when confronted, and my worrying statements about not wanting to be a mother. Some of the statements were things I'd said out loud in my therapist's office that had apparently made their way back to my mother via prayer requests. She confided that she sometimes wishes she could go back to before. My mother's affidavit read. She said she feels trapped. I am concerned she may resent the baby. I wanted to scream. Of course, there were moments I wished I could go back to before. Before the sleep deprivation. Before the constant worry. That didn't mean I didn't love my child. It meant I was human. My parents' lawyer asked the court for emergency temporary guardianship, arguing that my volatility and untreated mental illness posed a risk. Our court date was set for 2 weeks out. Emergency and family court time moves slower than you think. My lawyer filed a response. We included every letter, every positive note from my medical records, every piece of evidence that my parents were overreacting, or worse, deliberately building a false narrative. We asked for the petition to be dismissed and for the court to admonish my parents for abusing the system. Don't get your hopes up on that last part, my lawyer said. Judges rarely slap grandparents' wrists. They'll assume it's misguided love. But we can at least keep guardianship from being granted. The night before the hearing, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me pick up. Hello. Is this Madison? A woman's voice asked. Who's asking? I said, weary. It's Jess, she said. Your sister. I hadn't heard her voice in over 15 years. The last time we'd spoken, she was calling from a bus station in another state, telling me she loved me and that she couldn't do this anymore. How did you get my number? I asked. Erin, she said. She's been sending me updates. I heard what Mom and Dad are trying to do. My throat tightened. Of course they called you unstable, I said. I read the court files. Then you know this isn't their first rodeo, she said. You know they play dirty. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Back then. Why didn't you tell me Ava was yours? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I did, she said. Or at least I tried. Every time I came around, Mom would hover. She'd send you to the kitchen for more chips. She controlled the narrative. By the time I realized how deep it went, you were gone at college and they had full custody. Where is she? I asked. Ava. She's 20 now, Jess said. In college. Smart as hell. She thinks Mom and Dad are heroes for rescuing her. I'm the bio mom who couldn't get it together. She told me once it was better this way. That she was grateful God gave her to the right people. Her voice cracked. They won. I lost. I don't want that for you. Tears blurred my vision. What do? I whispered. You fight, she said. You do what I couldn't. You show the judge their notebook. You show the pattern. And when they cry and say they were just trying to help, you keep your spine. Will you come? I asked before I could overthink it. To court. There was a long pause. If you want me there, she said finally, I'll come. The courthouse was beige and cold. The kind of building where lives get rearranged behind heavy doors while people in the waiting area make small talk because the alternative is screaming. My parents sat on one side of the aisle with their lawyer, dressed in their Sunday best, Bibles in their hands like props. My mother's eyes were red. My father's jaw was tight. A few church friends sat behind them in solidarity. On my side, David, our lawyer, Aaron, and 15 minutes before the hearing, Jess, looking older and harder and somehow exactly the same. When she walked in, my mother gasped. You invited her? She hissed across the aisle. She has no standing here. She has more standing than your pastor, I muttered. The judge was a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a no-nonsense bun. She'd seen every flavor of family drama. We weren't going to shock her. My parents' lawyer went first. He painted a picture of loving, concerned grandparents watching their daughter spiral, a fragile new mother in denial about her mental illness, a vulnerable infant caught in the crossfire. He read selectively from my mother's notebook, emphasizing the bathtub thought, the crying, the wishes to disappear. He held up my missed therapy appointments as proof I wasn't taking my treatment seriously. He talked about my parents' stable home, their decades of experience, their strong support system through church. He asked the court to grant them temporary guardianship so their daughter can focus on healing without the burden of full-time child care. Our turn. My lawyer started with the facts. No CPS reports. No police involvement. A pediatrician letter stating Ruby was healthy and thriving. A therapist letter explaining intrusive thoughts and postpartum mood disorders. Then she pulled out my mother's notebook. This would be more compelling if it were an objective log, she said. Instead, it reads like a script. Every incident is framed in the most dramatic way. Context is omitted. She pointed to one entry. Here, for example, March 15th. Maddie refused to let me take baby to church nursery. Says she doesn't trust anyone. Increasing paranoia. My client says what actually happened was that she wanted to keep her 6-week-old with her during the service, which is a parenting choice, not a symptom. The judge skimmed the notebook, eyebrows knitting. Mrs. Bennett, she said to my mother, did you write this with a court in mind? My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue. I didn't want to forget anything that might be important if something happened, she said. We've seen such terrible stories on the news. I thought, if we had to go to someone, it would help to have details. So you were building a case, my lawyer said. No, my mother said quickly. We were just being prudent. Then Jess took the stand. My parents' lawyer objected. She's not a party to this action, he said. She has relevant testimony, my lawyer countered. The judge allowed it. Jess stood, took the oath, and then looked right at my parents as she spoke. She told the judge about her own guardianship case. How she'd been young and stupid and using drugs, yes, but also how our parents had leveraged every mistake she made into a weapon. How they documented every relapse but never mentioned the time she'd gotten clean. How they presented themselves as saints and her as a monster. How the court had believed them. I'm not saying I was Mother of the Year, she said. I wasn't. I messed up. A lot. But they didn't want to help me be better. They wanted control. They wanted a redo. Ava became their second chance to raise the perfect child. And I became the villain in everyone's story. I see them doing the same thing to Maddie now. My father's face was thunderous. My mother cried. Jessica has always twisted things, she said. She's bitter. Maybe, Jess said. But bitterness doesn't make this paperwork any less real. She held up one of the old court orders. The judge glanced at it. I'm not relitigating a 20-year-old case, she said, but I am noting a pattern of seeking guardianship over grandchildren when you disapprove of your children's lives. She turned to me. Miss Clark, she said, using my married name, do you feel you're able to care for your child? Yes, I said, my voice shaking but clear. I'm not perfect. I'm tired and overwhelmed, and sometimes I cry on the kitchen floor. But I love her. I feed her. I take her to her appointments. I sought help when I needed it. I have a therapist. I have a supportive husband. I have a job I'm on leave from that I fully intend to return to. I am doing the best I can. My parents, they see weakness where there is just humanity. They see any boundary as rebellion. They're used to being in control. I'm not denying I've struggled. I'm denying that those struggles make me unfit. The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed. This is why I both hate and appreciate family, she said. Nobody can help like family. Nobody can hurt like family either. She shuffled papers. I am denying the petition for guardianship, she said. My knees went weak. I gripped the table. There is no evidence before this court that Ruby is in immediate danger or that Miss Clark is unable to care for her. Postpartum depression, treated and monitored, is not grounds for removing a child. Missed therapy appointments are concerning, but hardly disqualifying. Intrusive thoughts, when recognized and managed appropriately, are not the same as intent to harm. She fixed my parents with a look. You have taken every normal new mother struggle and framed it in the worst possible light, she said. You have a history of using the courts to override your daughter's parenting when you disagree with their choices. That stops here. My mother burst into tears. We were just trying to help, she sobbed. We didn't want to lose another grandchild to chaos. What you wanted, the judge said evenly, was control. And you are not entitled to that. You are entitled to be loving grandparents. Support, not supplant. If you continue to harass your daughter or threaten to involve CPS without cause, she would be within her rights to limit your contact. Do you understand me? My father opened his mouth like he was going to argue, then thought better of it. Yes, Your Honor, he muttered. Outside the courtroom, my mother grabbed my arm. How could you do this to us? She cried. Drag our family business into court like this? After everything we've done for you. I gently pulled my arm free. You dragged us here, I said. You filed. We were only thinking of Ruby, she insisted. You're her mother, my father said, his voice low and furious. But we made you. Don't forget that. A little gratitude wouldn't kill you. Gratitude, I repeated. For trying to take my child? For what you did to Jess? For turning our whole lives into your morality play? Jess stepped forward. They're never going to see it, Maddie, she said quietly. Not really. You have to decide how much more of this you want. We walked to the parking lot together. The sun was too bright. My head ached. David strapped Ruby into her car seat. She giggled, oblivious. That night, I told my parents I needed space. We're going no contact for a while, I said over the phone. At least 6 months. No visits. No calls. If you want updates about Ruby, you can get them through Aaron. My mother sobbed. You're punishing us, she said. You're punishing us for loving your child too much. I'm protecting my child from people who tried to take her away, I said. You brought this on yourselves. Someday she'll grow up and hate you for keeping her from us, my father sneered. She'll see what you did. Someday she'll grow up and read the court records in your notebook, I said. She can decide for herself. It's been a year. My parents have not met the version of Ruby who runs now, who says mama and no and laughs when the dog licks her toes. They send cards on holidays addressed to our precious granddaughter, with Bible verses about forgiveness. I put them in a box. I don't know yet what I'll do with it. Erin still sees them. She sends me screenshots when my mother posts vague Facebook statuses about children who turn their backs on their upbringing and grandparents' rights. The church mostly sees them as martyrs. I know because we stopped attending and the pastor sent a letter that said, "We're praying for reconciliation." Jess and I text now. We're not magically best friends. There's too much water under that bridge. But there's a kind of weary understanding between us. She says things like, "I wish I'd had your spine at 20. And I say things like, "I wish I'd had your honesty at 17. Sometimes late at night after Ruby is finally asleep and the house is quiet, I lie in bed and stare at the ceiling and wonder if I've done the right thing. I hear my mother's voice in my head saying, "Family is everything," saying, "You'll thank us later," saying, "You're going to regret this when we're gone." I imagine explaining to Ruby someday why she doesn't remember her grandparents from her earliest years. I imagine her asking, "Were they bad people?" And me saying, "No. Yes. Kind of. They loved us the only way they knew how, and that way hurt too much." And underneath that always is the guilt. The feeling that I broke something sacred, that I am the daughter who destroyed the family by refusing to play my assigned role, that maybe I should have just swallowed it, signed the paper, trusted that my parents would never really take her. Then I remember the look on my father's face in the courthouse when the judge said no. The cold fury, the entitlement, the way he said, "We made you," like that meant my body, my baby, my life were theirs to rearrange. I remember Jess's voice on the phone, 20 years of loss condensed into, "Ava thinks God gave her to the right people." I look at Ruby's sleeping face and think I am her right people. That has to count for something. So that's where I am, internet strangers. I'm a 34-year-old new mom whose own parents tried to take her baby through the courts, framing my very normal postpartum struggles as evidence I was unfit, after already doing something similar to my older sister decades ago. A judge saw through it and denied their petition, basically telling them to back off. In response, my parents have decided I'm cruel, ungrateful, and brainwashed by therapy. I've chosen to go no contact and keep my daughter away from them, at least for now, to protect us both from their need to control everything. Part of me feels relieved. Part of me feels like I ripped my own family in half. If you were in my shoes, would you have cut your parents off completely after they tried to take your baby for your own good? Even though they also did a lot for you growing up, or would you keep them in your life under strict conditions so your child could have grandparents, hoping they'd never push that hard for control again?